Judaism stretches back some 4,000 years. So you'd expect everything about Jews to fit neatly into an instantly recognizable mold. I mean, if you repeat things for centuries, make that millennia, you should have it down pat, right? But that's not the case. Ask a Jew for a traditional Jewish dish. If she's Moroccan, it'll set your throat on fire. And if he's European, it might be so bland that it's swimming in horseradish to give it some taste. So what is the tradition? Because the contradictions go beyond taste. Look, in one synagogue, they chant together word by word. In another synagogue, each person murmurs quietly by themselves. What's the authentic Jewish way? Here they hide their Torah in a silver box and read it upright. But here, they dress it in a velvet coat and spread it out flat. And forget about pronunciation and melody. It sounds like different text. Which of these traditions is more Jewish? Which has contributed more to Jewish culture? Join us for a passionate debate on conflicting Jewish traditions. Championing the Sephardic traditions, we've got Rabbi Pinchas Allouche, leader of Congregation Beth Tefillah in Scottsdale, Arizona. Arguing for the Ashkenazi traditions, we've got Rabbi Yitzchak Schochet, leader of the Mill Hill Synagogue in London, England. Both are outspoken, well-spoken, and their spirited debate will not require a drop of horseradish to keep you on the edge of your seat.
Welcome to the great debate, Ashkenaz. As you may know, Jewish practice and culture is largely dependent on where our ancestors originate. If they come from Northern Africa, you may eat rice on Pesach, while if they come from Eastern Europe, your last name may end in son or vich. Today, as you heard, we will hear from two rabbis, one Ashkenazi, one Sephardi, on the merits and the impact of each of these unique but very Jewish lineages. On the Ashkenazi side, we have Rabbi Yitzchak Schochet, a descendant of generations of Ashkenazi rabbis, and himself the rabbi of a 75-year-old synagogue in London, UK. Rabbi Schochet. On the Sephardi side, we have Rabbi Pinchas Allouche, who descends from some great Sephardi rabbinic figures, as I'm sure we will hear soon. Rabbi Allouche is the rabbi of Beth Tefillah in Scottsdale, Arizona. Welcome up, rabbis. Okay, so these are the instructions for the rabbis. Today's debate will be structured into 6 prior agreed-upon segments. Neither of you knows what the other is planning to discuss in each segment. In each round, one of you will start, followed by the other, with a chance for a brief rebuttal before we move on to the next topic. The winner of today's debate is the one who is able to influence the audience's opinion. Whichever rabbi moves more people over to their side will be considered the winner. To gauge the audience opinion, we will begin with a vote. The motion of today's debate is, which Jewish community contributed more to Jewish life, culture, and continuity, Sephardim or Ashkenazim? To clarify, this is not which one you come from or which is superior, but which of these two communities has contributed more to Jewish life, culture, and continuity. So now, please take out your phones. If you think it's Sephardim, write the number 1 and send your text off. If you think it's Ashkenazim, then you want to write the number 2. And if you're not sure right now, you could put the number 3 and send that message. Now, we will not be showing the results until the end of the debate, and then we will pose the question again and vote one more time. At that vote, you will not get the option to say unsure, so listen closely to the rabbis. And now that we got the technicalities out of the way, we will begin with opening arguments from each of our rabbis as to why each of your sides should be the winning one. So we'll start with Rabbi Allouche.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure being here. I know that this might be an uphill battle for me because I think the majority here is Ashkenazi, including I'm moderator. I don't know how fair that is. But You may think that this is a debate between two separate sides, Sephardic and Ashkenazic. Well, I want to remind each and every one of you that the Jewish people have their roots in Sephardic countries, dare I say, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, King David, King Solomon, Queen Esther, Mordechai, you name them, they were all Sephardic, coming from Middle Eastern countries. If there are people who still want scientific researchers, well, let me read for you a scientific research by the Technion in Haifa, Israel, published in the National Library of Medicine, stating, listen to this, that 4 founding mothers are the ancestors of 2/5 of all Ashkenazic Jews. That means at least 2/5 of you have really a Sephardic ancestor from which you come from. Those 4 founding mothers, as this research states, probably came from a large Middle Eastern gene pool. So if you vote against Sephardic, you are voting against yourselves. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rabbi Allouche. Rabbi Schochet.
I am Rabbi Yitzchak Schochet. I am the rabbi and a direct descendant of 200 Ashkenazi rabbis. So I have a very important and very profound legacy to uphold. I just want to share one little idea, and that is the fact that this event was planned probably about 6-7 weeks ago or so, and then we sat down this morning and we finalized everything briefly over breakfast. And then just over 2 hours ago, Rabbi Allouche decided to introduce the idea of us doing a little bit of an introduction before we get straight into it. I don't know if it's typical or customary for Sephardic rabbis to regularly move the goalposts as you go along. And let me be very clear, I am not here today to disparage Sephardim in any way, shape, or form whatsoever. So if you are Sephardi, I apologize in advance for anything that I might say. Don't take it the wrong way. I am here uniquely to highlight the speciality and the uniqueness of Ashkenazi Jews, of Ashkenazi way of life, and I trust you will see the compelling unifying factor that Ashkenazi Jews and Ashkenazi ideology demonstrates as we go along. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Schochet. Okay, our first topic for today is something that we all like to talk about, especially over here, and that is food. So, Rabbi Schochet, you're first. Please share with us about Ashkenazi food in 3 minutes or less.
What's the first thing you see at an Ashkenazi table on a Friday night? You walk into your home, the table is beautifully adorned, the Shabbat candles are burning bright, the aroma of succulent challah is wafting through the air, the silver Kiddush cup sits beside the bottle of wine waiting for your blessing. What's the first delicacy that awaits you? Gefilte fish. What is gefilte fish? When you go deep sea diving, how do you know which ones are the gefilte fish? They're the ones with the little carrots on top. They are the frummest of all fish when they wear those little orange yarmulkes. But what is gefilte fish really? It's ground fish, typically mixed with onions, eggs, breadcrumbs, or matzah meal and seasonings. Can you think of a food more appropriate to eat on Shabbos? Think about this. The gefilte fish represents the uniqueness and the beauty of the Jew. Like fish which struggle to swim against the tide, we as Jewish people have been swimming against the tides of civilization since the birth of our nation. Just as gefilte fish is, as we said, ground fish, we Jewish people have been ground down through the ages by enemy after enemy and every ugly manifestation of anti-Semitism that seeks to oppress us. Just as gefilte fish is a mix and assimilation of varied ingredients that go into the making of the gefilte fish, there are myriad cultures, philosophies, and ideologies that are the antithesis of sacred norms that seek to penetrate the walls of our Jewish values and assimilate us into the prevailing culture. But what has been our bulwark against this? What has enabled us to persevere and maintain our identity all of this time? Shabbos. Whatever life threw at us, Shabbos preserved us. Indeed, it has been said, more than the Jewish people have kept Shabbat, Shabbat has kept the Jewish people. The gefilte fish is the first thing to adorn the Shabbos table, to remind us how even now, 3,000 years later, And despite whatever the challenges, the Shabbos was, is, and always will be the focal point of Jewish family and community that enables us to persevere. So next time you sit down to eat some gefilte fish, think about this. At the beginning of time, our sages tell us when God created the world, there were only 3 things that he associated the word blessing with: man, Shabbos, and fish. If Shabbos is our oasis in time, gefilte fish is the epicenter of that oasis. And I suggest to you, in terms of its true symbolism, this Ashkenazi delicacy is unparalleled amongst all and any Jewish food out there.
Thank you. Rabbi Allouche, your turn.
Thank you, Rabbi Schochet. If I may add, for us, it's Moroccan fish at the epicenter of that oasis. But speaking of Sephardic foods and their symbols, I do want to focus on 2 of the many Sephardic foods that I'm sure you are all familiar with. The first one is the foods that are presented to you at a Rosh Hashanah Sephardic Seder. It's astonishing to me that while if you go to an Ashkenazi Seder, you may just have an apple dipped in honey, but if you go to Sephardic Seder, you have many, many more dishes. Why? Because for us, food is not just food. Food is our way of conveying blessings. Every food you see at the Rosh Hashanah Seder represents yet a different blessing. For example, beets are eaten because beet in Hebrew is selek, and that also means to remove, because we pray that all of our enemies should be removed from us. French Jews eat bananas. French Sephardic Jews eat bananas during a Rosh Hashanah Seder. Why? Because the greeting of have a good year in French is bonne année, which sounds like banana. Thus, they offer one another bananas. But food is not just our way of conveying blessings. Food is also our way of connecting ourselves to our tradition, to our Torah. Take the shakshuka, for example, that I'm sure you all love. The shakshuka has 2 eggs or sometimes more within its mix of jalapeno peppers, tomatoes, and other delicious spices and foods. Why those 2 eggs? Apparently the shakshuka food, which comes originally from Libya, was a food that was offered at Shiva homes in order to comfort the mourners, to remind them that although a person may have been deceased from this world, his life continues on and on like the roundness of the egg. So there you see, food is not just a way to convey blessing, but it is also our way of connecting ourselves to some of the deepest ideas in the Torah. Dare I add that, to my humble opinion, that might be backed by science. It's enough to look at the ingredients in Sephardic foods. Sephardic foods are a little more sophisticated, thus maybe a little more tasty. Thank you.
Rabbi Schochet, anything to reply?
Yeah, I think that's kind of sad how limited you are to foods on Rosh Hashanah and foods that represent mourning. Gefilte fish every Friday night. Do you know, in actual fact, gefilte fish is the single most ancient and traditional of all foods? You know where it really gets its name from? When God split the sea and the Jews were crossing, they were thirsty, but the water was salty. So God put fish in the walls, drank the water in, filtered out the salt, and spat out fresh water. Hence it's called Go Filter Fish. But seriously, and perhaps just as important, is that gefilte fish, more than any other food, has a unifying element. If you're Ashkenazi and you intend on trying a Sephardic fish, or frankly any other type of Sephardic delicacy, be sure to have your indigestion pills with you. Because if the peppers won't kill you, the jalapenos certainly will. And you see, here's the point. All Jews, Sephardic included, can readily participate in a gefilte fish or other Ashkenazi food. Maybe a little too bland for your liking, but perfectly tolerable, even if you don't think it's delicious. Not all Jews, arguably even those with a high constitution and good digestive system, can handle a Sephardic cazuela de pescado con jalapeno, or chremi on a Friday night, or any other time for that matter.
Okay.
I'd rather food that all Jews can unite in and enjoy with together.
Okay, Rabbi Allouche.
So speaking of foods that Jews can unite with, first, I have yet to meet an Ashkenazi Jew that refuses to eat Sephardic foods. I can't say that that is true the opposite way. But to your point, Rabbi Schochet, I dare you to walk into any kosher restaurant, I'm sure even in London, and you will find that the Sephardic foods take the center stage of the menu. I haven't yet seen too many Jews walk into a kosher restaurant and order a gefilte fish. I have seen many Jews who have walked into a kosher restaurant and have ordered couscous. Speaking of couscous, that is yet another type of food that connects us to our tradition. Do you know why? Couscous is eaten by Sephardic Jews because that was the food eaten in the Jerusalem temple. It was named solet. There you go.
Thank you. Lots of food for thought. Our next topic is about yourselves, rabbis. Please tell us some of your family's greatest rabbis, and we'll start with Rabbi Allouche.
Sure. Speaking of Sephardic rabbis, if I may, before I go to my family's rabbis, I would like to point out...
Whatever you could say in 3 minutes.
3 minutes, yeah. 2 minutes and 50 seconds left. So, Sephardic rabbis still have this unique and uncanny ability to take the Torah and make it as practical as possible. We see that with halachic authorities. For example, the Rif, Rabbi Yitzchak al-Fassi of Morocco, of Fez, of the 12th century. We see that his commentary on the Talmud is very, as it is called in Hebrew or in Aramaic, aliba deshmate, that he searches for the exact law that you can take home and practice. A law that may found itself in some confusing passage in the Talmud, yet that Sephardic rabbi, as all of them do, they want you to come out of studying with practice. The Rambam, Maimonides, is yet another example. Ashkenazic rabbis, on the other hand, like the Baalei Tosfot, the French rabbis, who also commented on the Tanya, they could go on and on and on, and you come out more with a headache than anything to actually do. Reminding us, of course, of what the ethics of our fathers teaches, that alomed al menat la'asot, the one who studies in order to do, is the highest type of learning and the highest type of Jewish practice. We are what we do. Sephardic rabbis know that, thus their whole learning strategy is geared towards that. But speaking of specific rabbis, I know I just have 1 minute left. I do want to speak about Maimonides. I have yet to encounter in Jewish history a person of such an all-encompassing persona, someone who was an astronomer, a physician, someone who became the physician of the Sultan, who influenced countries and kings. He is the one responsible for single-handedly saving Yemenite Jewry. He is the one also responsible for us studying Rambam every day. He is the one responsible for taking the entire Torah and making sense of it, again, aliba deshmate. Someone like that, a Sephardic Jew, or an Ashkenazic Jew like that, I have yet to encounter. But speaking of my personal roots, I'd like to go to two separate rabbis, the Or HaChaim. Rabbi Chaim ben Attar, who was the true founder of the Hasidic movement, dare I say. I did not say that. The Baal Shem Tov, who may be also called the founder of the Hasidic movement, said that or hinted towards that because when the Or HaChaim passed away in Israel, the Baal Shem Tov, who lived in Belarus, felt it. It was on a Saturday afternoon, and then he said, I have been given the lights that is usually given to the tzaddik of the generation. He received that baton from a Sephardic rabbi, maybe making him again, therefore, the true founder of the Hasidic movement.
Okay, Rabbi Schochet.
Have you ever heard of Rashi? Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, 11th century medieval French rabbi, Ashkenazi, who wrote the most comprehensive commentary on all of the Tanakh and the entire Talmud. There is hardly a Chumash in the world which doesn't contain his commentary, and there is not a Talmud in the world which doesn't contain his commentary. The genius with which Rashi approaches Chumash is intended precisely to enable every 5-year-old child today to ultimately understand what the Chumash is looking to communicate. Sure, there were greats before Rashi who understood the text without him, but reality is none of us today would be able to properly understand any Chumash, any Talmud without him. There's not a single Jewish educational institution in the world that doesn't teach Rashi. He's the foundational figure that gives us access to the comprehension of basic Jewish text and ultimately Jewish law. Let's fast forward. Rabbi Allouche mentioned the Balei Tosafot, later medieval Ashkenazi commentators on the Talmud, also France, Germany. One of them was Rashi's own grandson, Rabbeinu Tam, cited in every volume and every tractate of Talmud throughout. And it's fascinating to consider the fact that Sephardic halachic codifiers were especially dogmatic. The Balei Tosafot were much more pragmatic, taking into account practicalities. For example, Maimonides, whom he referenced, the leading Sephardic codifier, rules that one is only allowed to give up their lives to sanctify God's name in very specific circumstances. In other circumstances, Maimonides rules it's forbidden and tantamount to taking your own life. Rabbeinu Tam tweaks the halacha to fit the circumstances and justify thereby the illustrious past of people who gave up their lives even when not required. In other words, rather than taking the law as black and white, he, like other Ashkenazi rabbis, would seek justification within the text in order to justify and sanctify certain practices. Another case in point, Talmud tells us you're not allowed to enter into business with non-Jews, because should you fall into dispute and you're going to go to court, you're going to cause the non-Jew to mention and invoke the name of his own God, which will be triggered effectively by the Jew, and that's a biblical violation. Once again, Rabbeinu Tam comes to our rescue. In the Middle Ages, it was near impossible already not to do business with a non-Jewish partner. So he rules that it's okay. And don't worry about going to court, because if they have to make an oath, they'll invoke God's name, but maybe other components, therefore, of the Trinity as well. It's not just about nuance. It was being pragmatic in specific circumstances in order to enable Jewry to function in society whilst remaining loyal to halacha. Again, the element of inclusivity. I think you'll find this pattern today as well. Sephardic rabbis beat the drum to strict halacha, and sometimes like to beat your conscience to a pulp in the process. Ashkenazi rabbis invoke concepts of kavod habriot, meaning respect for humanity, mishum eva, meaning to ensure kinship with non-Jews, chisar and kis, meaning financial considerations, etc. Those are my kind of inclusive rabbis.
Thank you. And Rabbi Allouche, your turn to respond.
Rabbi Schochet, I'm glad you mentioned inclusivity, because my great-grandfather, who was the chief rabbi of Constantine, Algeria, I think epitomizes what inclusivity truly means. He writes in his own book, Eretz Tov, that he learned this from other Sephardic rabbis that came before him. How did he epitomize inclusivity? Well, let me tell you that in Constantine, Algeria, there were many assimilated Jews, and they had to go and work on Shabbat, on a Saturday. Did he therefore admonish them? Did he therefore excommunicate them? No, quite the opposite. He was as inclusive as could be. He asked them to lead a Shabbat morning service at 5 a.m. so that they could at least pray before going to work on the Shabbat. And he, as the chief rabbi of Constantine, joined them every single Shabbat to show how much he loves them and how much indeed inclusivity was paramount by him and all Sephardic rabbis.
Rabbi Schochet?
So my great ancestor, Rashi, direct descendant, I have the document. I mean, let's face it, we all, including Rabbi Allouche, wear Rashi tefillin, all inclusive. He mentioned much earlier on about the Orach Chaim. The Orach Chaim, like all other Kabbalists, will base themselves upon the fundamentals of Kabbalah founded in the Zohar by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, also an Ashkenazi rabbi. Yes, he mentioned at the very beginning that Abraham was a Sephardi. It's true. He was born in a Sephardic land, but don't forget, God told him to leave that land. And of course, Moses, the greatest of all leaders, was also born to Ashkenazi rabbis. And a final case in point, you know, the Rebbe found an allusion within text to the idea that girls from the age of 3 should start lighting Shabbat candles. It's beautiful. It adds spiritual illumination to the world. Again, an example of Ashkenazi being pragmatic. A leading, who shall remain nameless, a leading Sephardic halachas ruled within the strict parameters of the law and said, no, girls of 3 should not do so. Ashkenazi rabbis highlight how we need a pragmatic theological approach that works in tandem with the interpretation of the text in order to create a healthy equilibrium, which is loyal to the giver of the law as well as the people of the book.
Okay. The next favorite topic for most people is music. The sounds coming from each of your respective synagogues probably differ greatly. Rabbi Schochet, can you share with us about Ashkenazi music?
I'm going to talk about Ashkenazi music in general and let it speak for itself. I need to say from the outset that every Jewish song is meaningful and powerful. It conveys the depth of emotion of the human psyche and soul. And then there's the nigun, that wordless song. A song so lofty, so powerful, so spiritual, that it transcends any expression that could be put into words. One example, the Daled Bavos is one such song. It means 4 stanzas. It was composed by the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad, Ashkenazi. It's not just a nigun, but it is the nigun hanigunim, the ultimate song. It's not a song, just a song in per se, but it's a stirring song that moves through 4 phases, getting higher and higher. The 4 stanzas correspond to the 4 levels of your godly soul. It corresponds to the 4 worlds above. So lofty is this song that it is only ever sung in unique circumstances, that is at Jewish weddings or at special Hasidic gatherings. So let's take a minute, close your eyes, breathe in deeply, clear your thoughts, get in touch with your soul, and feel this song.
Rabbi Allouche.
Thank you for that, Rabbi Schochet. I will make a musical observation. As a pianist, my ears caught on the fact that Sephardic songs are mostly in the major scale, while Ashkenazic songs largely on the minor scale. What does that tell us as musicians? That Sephardic songs are much happier. Sephardic songs are unfortunately sadder. And we see that also permeating prayer, permeating Jewish life altogether. One of my favorite Sephardic songs is the song of Adon HaSelichot, a song that we're about to recite during the month of Elul and thereafter on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Adon HaSelichot is a plea for God to forgive us. But it's interesting that that song is actually a happy song, which reminds me of the story of the Baal Shem Tov, who was once visiting a village and someone told him, hey, you should admonish this Jew who when he prays, he confesses his sins, he's happy and he sings. So Baal Shem Tov goes and speaks to him and says, is it true what I'm hearing about you? The Jew says, yes, of course. But let me ask you, Baal Shem Tov, if you were in the king's palace and your job was to sweep the floors, would you do that with tears? Would you do that with joy? I am sweeping myself, sweeping my palace that is attached to God's palace. Shouldn't I do that with joy too? The Baal Shem Tov not only agreed, but he encouraged everyone in that village to do the same. Maybe knowing what Sephardim knew all around, that song with joy is song that is so necessary in the Jewish life and so necessary in life altogether.
Okay, Rabbi Schochet, what do you have to say?
Rabbi Allouche, you claim to have an ear for music, and yet you refer to Hasidic nigun and melody as sad. That's actually quite sad. Because you know as well as I do that Hasidic melody is soul-stirring, and there's a critical difference between one and the other. I wonder if there are any songs in the Sephardic world that can parallel the Dalet Bavas that we heard or other such like songs. And back to my earlier point, I don't believe that there are any Ashkenazi chuppahs where a Sephardic song will be played. I do know of many a Sephardic chuppah, including Rabbi Allouche's own chuppah, where the Dalet Bavas will have been played. Once again, the unifying factor.
Okay, Rabbi Allouche, your turn.
That's how inclusive we are, Rabbi Schochet. But that's true. They won't be played maybe at the chuppah, but in Ashkenazi weddings, they will be played when they want people to dance. That's that. But I refer to the minor scale being a sad scale, which it is. All musicians will tell you that. It's true that Hasidic songs are soul-stirring, but the question is, how do we want to stir this soul? Do we want to stir it with melancholy, or should we stir it with happiness? The Sephardic take is almost each time stir it with happiness, and I'll subscribe to that any day.
Thank you. Okay, moving along. Holidays are up next. So I love a Pesach Seder with all the traditions. I've never been to a Sephardi one.
More than welcome.
Rabbi Allouche, what can you tell us about Sephardi holiday customs?
So, first, I welcome you and everyone here to Sephardic Seder. It's an experience like never other. As many of you may know, Sephardic Seders also emphasize joy, but they also emphasize leniency. Leniency, that's correct. Even the Alter Rebbe, the founder of the Chabad movement, writes that the Sephardic Jews were more lenient than the Ashkenazic Jews. Why? Because they seek to include as many Jews as possible. They want as big of a tent as could be. Thus, those leniencies that we also find during the Passover Seder or Passover altogether. You may be familiar with the leniency of kitniyot. Kitniyot. Why not allow it? It's beyond me. You know, the Ashkenazic Jews have a saying in Yiddish that it's schwer zu sein Yid. It's difficult to be a Jew. So friends, why make it more difficult? But that's kitniyot. What I find most beautiful in the Sephardic customs is this great emphasis on unity. Walk into any Sephardic synagogue, and first and foremost, you will see that the shape of the synagogue is a U shape. Why? Because we are all in it together. Standard tables don't exist in Sephardic synagogues, because the closer we are, not just physically, of course, but emotionally, the better it is. The Sephardic Torah, as you saw on the screen, is a Torah that is standing, not lying down. Do you know why? Because the Sephardic rabbis sought to include the congregation in the Torah reading. They needed, therefore, the Torah to be seen by the congregants. Again, this element of unity. I can quote many, many other customs, but maybe the most favorite of mine is the Sephardic Havdalah. At the very end of Shabbat, we gather, and instead of singing Oy, 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 we erupt in laughter when when we say the Hagefen prayer, not the Hagafen, the Hagefen prayer, we look at our cup and we laugh. Do you know why we do that? So that we can unite in laughter. And through that unity of laughter, no doubt our week will be sustained too with unity and with laughter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi Schochet.
When I say Rosh Hashanah food, what's one of the first things that comes to mind? We heard it before, apple and honey. Every kid I know sings, dip the apple in the honey. Not in several Sephardic communities, it's more like dip the apple in the sugar. I feel sorry for some of those kids growing up. When I say Pesach food, what's one of the first things that comes to mind? Matzah balls, if not on the first days, certainly on the last. You imagine a Pesach without bobas knelach? Sephardim can. For them, it's minna or miguana, or however you pronounce it, it's lasagna made from matzah soaked in water. Yuck. Creative indeed, but Pesach without the traditional matzah balls is I don't even know, I can't even imagine it. Speaking of Pesach, everyone here knows the song Dayenu, right? Everyone's #1 Pesach song. Could you imagine getting up in the middle of the song and starting to whack each other over the head with oversized scallions? Yup, you guessed it. Good old Sephardim, unifying, you've got to be kidding. I guess, yes, it's reminiscent of our suffering in Egypt. I don't get how it fits with that particular song of gratitude, but that's by the by. I indeed prefer the joyful, happy, clappy, sing-along, Dayenu, rather than laying myself wide open to a lawsuit from my mother-in-law because I whacked her too hard, which admittedly would not necessarily be a mistake. Apparently, some Sephardim have the custom of tying the ketubah, that is the marriage contract under a chuppah, onto the arm of the bride. I don't know if that has implied misogynistic implications. But I know that it's customary to tie the afikoman to the arm of a son that they would like to see married as symbolism that in the coming year he'd be able to tie the ketubah to his bride. That's one solution for the shidduch crisis. If I ask you to think about the high holiday prayers, what's one prayer that comes immediately to mind? Unesana Tokef. It's a powerful prayer that in pithy, graphic terms captures the sentiment of the day, who shall live and, God forbid, the contrary. Tradition has passed down that it's a powerful story of a rabbi who died for his faith. People pay fortunes for the honor of opening the ark at that moment in time. It's deemed the pinnacle of the high holiday service, regrettably omitted by many Sephardic communities. You might say they make up for it by the whole month of Slichot, that Rabbi Allouche referred to before, reciting the regular lengthy penitence prayers very early morning before Rosh Hashanah. We Ashkenazim only start a week before Rosh Hashanah. Maybe we have less to atone for. And finally, you all know that women are not obligated in time-bound mitzvot. Nevertheless, should they choose to undertake any such mitzvah, like listening to the shofar, making a blessing on the lulav, etc., then they can do so, with one caveat. According to Sephardim, she can't make a blessing, because since she's not obligated in the mitzvah, the blessing will be considered in vain. Of course, the Ashkenazi school of thought that is much more inclusive of women as well says, granted, the biblical mitzvah is optional for women, but should they choose to undertake it, they can make a blessing on it as well. So in accordance with Ashkenazi custom, if you're a woman, you're right up there with the men in all aspects of the fulfillment of the various holiday mitzvot.
Rabbi Allouche, what do you have to say?
Look, you mentioned, Rabbi Schochet, you mentioned many different customs. I don't think I have time to go over each and every one of them, but dare I suggest that your research be a little more thorough next time, because regarding the Passover Seder, it is true that we have these wonderful customs. Persian Jews, I know, for example, there you go, have the custom of taking scallions on the Passover Seder and beating one another with them. But maybe it is first and foremost a beating of love, and the Persian Jews will attest to that, but also maybe because we don't have, what is it called? Crane. We don't have all those bitter elements of the Seder that we need to make them up and, in a way, make up for the sweetness of the Sephardic Seder. I will also say that you spoke about the role of the woman. I can name many customs that are purely Sephardic and not Ashkenazic that highlight the woman. For example, the chinas ceremony. Before a woman gets married, She has her own ceremony in which she's celebrated and given an abundance of gifts. It is called the China. I'm sure many of you have attended such a ceremony. What do you do for Ashkenazi brides? I'm not sure.
Let's find out.
Have
Rabbi
you
Schochet.
never heard of a Shabbat Kala? Well, there you go.
It's
That's the
Sephardic
same thing,
too.
except that the week before on Shabbos, there's a special celebration for the Kala. As you said, do your research. Arguably, the biggest bugbear for Ashkenazim is the custom, as we heard before, not to eat rice on Pesach, because it falls under the category of kitniyot. This was enacted because kitniyot are similar in texture to chametz. Even bread can sometimes be made out of rice flour, so people might assume that if, for example, rice cakes can be eaten on Pesach, rye bread can be eaten too. It was just different circumstances in Sephardic communities. But you know what? You go into any subway station, and they have red or yellow lines along the platform. There's nothing illegal stepping over that line, but it is there to safeguard you from anything worse that could otherwise happen. Sometimes it's good and even necessary to have safeguards in place. And so no rice, just to protect yourself from otherwise stumbling into eating chametz. For those of you Ashkenazim who can't imagine life without sushi for 8 days, get over yourselves.
Okay. Rabbis, in each of your synagogues, are the prayers that are said there that different from one another? Rabbi Schochet, can you please tell us about the prayer at your synagogue?
So there were these two little sisters who were spending their Hanukkah weekend at their grandparents'. And at bedtime, they're lying on their beds, getting ready to utter their prayers, and suddenly the little sister starts to pray at the top of her lungs. I pray for a new Barbie doll house. I pray for a new Lego set. I pray for a new Nintendo Switch. The older sister looks at her and says, why are you shouting like that? God isn't deaf, you know? And she says, oh, I know that, but Grandma is. Can someone tell me why Sephardic Jews pray every single word out loud, yelling? And not just out loud, but so loud. God isn't deaf, you know. Give me an Ashkenazi service any day, calm, quiet, composed. According to Jewish law, one is supposed to recite the Amidah, especially silently, so as not to disrupt their neighbor praying next to them. Why would anyone want to go to the opposite extreme for the rest of prayer? How am I supposed to concentrate on my words in my prayer when Shalom on my right is bellowing in a C minor and Moshe to my left is screeching in an F major? I once walked, true story, into a wrong shul on a Friday night. I was supposed to meet my host in Golders Green, who had already left to shul, but instead of locating his shtibel, I ended up in Ohel Moshe. I'm not going to lie to you. As soon as I realized it, I thought I'd want to be at a hasty retreat. But the rabbi, Rabbi David, recognized me and invited me to come sit next to him. To my pleasant surprise, they were not doing every prayer out loud, word for word. And I thought, good. At least I'll get back to the meal on time. And then, Shir Nashirim Asher Lishlomo. And I'm thinking, oh no, what's this? What's happening here? Yashikeini Minishikat Bio. There's widespread custom to recite this text from King Solomon each Friday night. But every word out loud, 30 minutes and 8 chapters later, Virach Dodi. By the time I got back to my host, the soup was cold. Now, I mean no disrespect to my fellow Jewish brothers and sisters, but if I was brought up with that, I would never have become a rabbi because I might have stopped going to shul altogether. I'm not saying we should rush through our prayers. What I am saying is that we should be mindful of the fact that people have limited concentration spans, and a cacophony of voices spread over 3 hours is, to my mind, hardly conducive to the required meditation and contemplation required during prayer. Quick case in point. As you're aware, the priestly blessing, what we otherwise call duchening on all Jewish festivals. Many Sephardic communities do it every day or of every single Shabbat, etc. The Ashkenazi codifiers say we don't do this because at that point in time, people are going to be concerned about getting off to work, and they won't be properly focused on the actual prayers and blessings that are taking place. In other words, we avoid elongating services. You might argue that suggests that Sephardim have more time on their hands. I would argue that Ashkenazi style of prayer takes into account the human condition and tailors it accordingly, thus encouraging more Jews to want to attend shul and participate in the synagogue service.
Thank you. Rabbi Allouche, can you tell us something about the Sephardi prayers, please?
Sure. Let me just relate to Rabbi Schochet's words and say that if the shuls I grew up with sounded like your Shira Shirim Asher Li Shlomo, I too wouldn't have become a rabbi. But the question that Sephardic Jews really ask is, what is prayer and what is the role of the synagogue with prayer? Well, let us remember that the word for synagogue in Hebrew is Beit Knesset, which means a house of gathering of people, gathering of voices. No synagogue in the world demonstrates that gathering of voices more than Sephardic synagogues. I will add to that prayer for us also is a language of love. I know there are 5 languages of love, while according to Sephardic Jews there are 6. Prayer. Why? Because in prayer we speak to God all together as one united nation that is simply in love with its Creator. Thus, we ask ourselves, can we harmonize together and express this love as parents would want to harmonize together to express their love to their children? Or you can use any other analogy. I will also add something that might sound very controversial, and I don't mean to tread here in strange waters, but still, for the sake of the argument, it is clear that Sephardic prayer has been influenced by the mosque, Arabic culture. But it is also clear that Ashkenazi prayer has been influenced by the church. According to this following halacha, I would rather be influenced by the mosque than the church. Why? Because according to Jewish law, one is allowed to enter a mosque since we pray to the same God. One is not allowed to enter a church because we do not pray to the same God. That is yet another reason for why I would also pick Sephardic prayer, however strange they may sound to you, Rabbi Schochet, than Ashkenazic prayers. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Allouche. Rabbi Schochet.
It's actually a baseless statement. It's true. When you listen to the Sephardi music, singing, prayer, etc., it sounds very much like the mosque. There's nothing about the Ashkenazi prayer that bases itself on the church. It was the case. Some of the layout of the synagogue did, and that has subsequently been changed. So throwing out facts need to be fact-checked. Bottom line, I don't want to keep my wife and family waiting. I don't want to keep my host waiting. I don't want the soup to go cold. I want the service to be meaningful, but equally a practical experience. And I find myself coming back to my inclusive argument. Sephardim will find it pretty straightforward to navigate their way through an Ashkenazi service. I know this because I have several of them, as I'm sure many of you do, that attend my shul. On the other hand, sticking an Ashkenazi Jew into a Sephardic service is like sticking an Eskimo into Miami Beach. You'll feel the warmth, but you'll have no clue what to do. And the noise will scare you. To put it in similar words, as I said before about food and gefilte fish, all Jews, including the 500,000 Sephardic Jews in America, will find their way and be comfortable in an Ashkenazi service. Not all Jews. In fact, the overwhelming majority of the remaining 6.5 million Jews in America will struggle to navigate their way through a Sephardic service. Again, so much more unifying.
Rabbi Allouche.
Okay, I'd like to relate to that. First and foremost, I, together with my wife, founded Congregation Bet Tefillah in Scottsdale, Arizona, a Sephardic synagogue indeed. But I find it quite interesting that over 50% of our membership, we have now 500 families, is actually Ashkenazic. So if your words were true, then this would not be the case. Secondly, you speak of the length of prayer. I remind you where you come from, Rabbi Schochet, Hasidic circles in which prayer is encouraged to be long. In fact, one of the great praises we give Hasidim is that they daven be'arichus. They daven lengthily. So what would be wrong to an Ashkenazic Hasidic Jew? That Sephardic Jews pray longly. But let me add yet another element since I have 13 seconds left. We've spoke about the shape of prayer. We did not speak about the content of prayer. I found it quite astonishing that the Alter Rebbe, the founder of the Hasidic movement, founded his Nusach, which is called the Nusach Ha'ari, on the Sephardic Jew, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, and on his prayer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, rabbis. And now for the closing arguments, in 150 seconds or less, please tell us why your community has contributed more to Jewish life, culture, and continuity. Rabbi Allouche.
So one of the great quotes from the Talmud that us Hasidim like to quote is the quote of Ezo Chasid Amit Chased Im Kono. Who is a Chassid, which is really the goal, or should be the goal of every Jew, one who is generous with his Creator. I do believe that based on everything you've heard and based perhaps on your familiarities with Sephardic customs, you will see that the Sephardic Jews embody that teaching. We are generous with our Creator. You see it in the way we give blessings to one another, whether when you receive an aliyah or whether, as mentioned, during the Rosh Hashanah Seder. You see it in the way we respect our rabbis and go the extra mile for them. You'll see it in the way we eat. You'll see it in the way, as mentioned, we pray. You'll see it in almost every Jewish way. You'll see what is called that hidur mitzvah, the beautifying of every mitzvah, because we strive to become true Hasidim, people who are generous with their Creator. That's maybe on an essential note. On a more general note, I would call you to the statistics that speak about how Sephardic Jews have been much less assimilated than Ashkenazic Jews. Now, Napoleon emancipated Europe, but let's not forget he emancipated North Africa too. So the assimilation there could have happened just as well. Perhaps this is because what the Lubavitcher Rebbe said to the chief emissary, the Shaliach of France, in which many, many Sephardic communities exist and thrive, and that is that because Sephardic Jews are ma'aminim bnei ma'aminim. They are believers, sons of believers. For them, they have no patience for superficiality and for semi-truths. They want the truth, they might not observe it, but they are dedicated to it and they respect it most of all. With that truth, they guard their lives. With that truth, they illuminate the world, and with that truth, they ensure Jewish continuity. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Rabbi Schochet.
Rabbi Allouche mentioned before about the Torah being standing upright in order for everybody to be able to see it. In actual fact, you know, a mezuzah is always placed at an angle. You know why? Because it's a matter of debate, whether it should be horizontal or vertical. So in the spirit of compromise, we put it at an angle. The Torah that the Ashkenazim read is placed on a bima, on a platform that is always very much like this at an angle. Again, in the spirit of compromise, should it be upright? Should it be flat? So we put it at an angle. This spirit of compromise. I've highlighted for you the inclusiveness, the pragmatic and the unifying elements in all aspects within the Ashkenazi world. In fact, we don't just keep to ourselves, we look to permeate throughout and share the wealth, the beauty of Judaism throughout. Needless to say, in actual fact, the word Sephardic is actually non-existent in biblical text. Ashkenaz is already mentioned in God's book, Genesis 10:3. The greatest Jews in history were Ashkenazim. Yes, as we mentioned before, Abraham, he was told to leave his land. Isaac, Jacob, Moses, they were all Ashkenazim. Even the contemporary mind in modern history from which all of society benefits were Ashkenazim. Isaiah Berlin, Elie Wiesel, Spinoza, Freud, you name it. Albert Einstein was Ashkenazi. So I want to tell you something. I am Ashkenazi and I am proud. But friends, I have to stress this. The greatest Ashkenazi Jew that we had in our generation, from whom even Rabbi Allouche draws his inspiration, was the Rebbe. The greatest calamity in the Jewish world is the division between Jews. Look at the travesty of what's going on in Israel today, and alas, to one extent or another, what's been going on between Jews for more than 2,000 years, which has landed us in this exile. And the Rebbe has made it his mission statement to continue to communicate to us. Yes, we have our differences, but take this from an Ashkenazi rabbi. We need to get past those differences, and as the Rebbe, Ashkenazi, used to always emphasize, realize that what unites us is far greater than that which divides us, such that if we learn to embrace and dance together, then we really will bring Mashiach now.
Okay, Rabbi Allouche. Thank you, Rabbi Schochet.
I don't need closing remarks. I'll let you look ridiculous with that Einstein shirt.
Okay, so before you leave, rabbis, right now, everyone, we're going to vote again. I want to thank both rabbis for representing their viewpoints. And this time, we're going to be able to see the results in real time. Take out your phones again. Go back to your text message that you sent at the beginning. And the question is, which Jewish community contributed more to Jewish life, culture, and continuity? If you think the answer is Sephardim, text the number 1. And if it's Ashkenazim, text the number 2. And we're going to compare with the original results. Okay, originally Ashkenazim had 44%, and Sephardim had? Oh, originally Sephardim had 44%,
and
thank
39.
you. And 39 for
And on the
Ashkenazi.
shore, 17.
How much?
17, and now the vote is Sephardim 31, Ashkenazim, which means the Ashkenazim have won.
So our winner for today is the Ashkenazim community, but, and thank you, Rabbi,
Wait,
for
isn't
doing
he
a great
supposed to
job.
cross over?
Sorry?
Is he moving the goalposts again? He's supposed to cross over. That's what you said at the beginning.
Well, we'll have the rabbis debate together what they're going to do, but when all is said and done, we are one Jewish people, as Rabbi Schochet said. And as such, I'd like to ask each rabbi to give us a couple of minutes on the cohesion and unity of both unique and beautiful lineages.
Thank you so much. Thank you. As closing remarks, first of all, I knew it was an uphill battle, but I will quote my beloved Rabbi Adin Even Yisrael Steinsaltz of blessed memory, who would often say that one of the main differences between human beings and animals is that animals can only live with their own. Giraffes live with giraffes, zebras live with zebras, lions will live with lions, and so on and so forth. Human beings are supposed to know how to live and embrace even the other. This is really what this is all about. We may be different, but there is great unity in diversity. There is great harmony in our Jewish symphony. Thus I close with the prayer that we say each and every day, Barucheinu Avinu, Kulanu Ke'echad Be'or Panecha. God, may you bless us all together as one with the light of your countenance. Thank you so much.
Amen.
Thank you. Rabbi Schochet.
I think you'll all readily agree that the greatest nemesis in society, perhaps more so today than ever before, is the division, the disparity, the differences of opinion. And when someone doesn't concur with my opinion, we have this cancel culture where we look to completely obliterate them, etc. And in as much as we spent the last hour now debating and demonstrating and not in any way, God forbid, disparaging, needless to say, and not surprisingly, Ashkenazi won. But what is always paramount and essential to remember, and I urge you to take this back with you into your life, into your community, is that though we may be two Jews with three opinions, we must always maintain one heart. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you, rabbis.